In this lesson, we'll discuss how to use reflections to create layers, depth and contrast, and overall build a more visually interesting image. So I've always loved trying to look for reflections, and the work of Vivian Maier has had a huge influence on me wanting to do that. I've always loved how she playfully uses reflections to take self-portraits, how she uses windows and mirrors and puddles. I really love the kind of sense of mystery and just the overall extra dimension you can add into a photograph by working with reflections and experimenting with how to include these in your frame. It's just a really fun way to build extra layers onto your image. So the morning we went out to take our photographs for the final project, it had rained extremely heavily the night before, but we got quite lucky when we went out. It was a nice sunny morning. We went out in London Fields. This was our first point of call on our little photo walk route that we made, and there were these gigantic puddles from a little bit of flooding from the night before. And we had this beautiful light coming through the trees as well, so there is always this element of chance. Obviously we weren't planning for that, but it was just a nice little thing that we could work with. Since we went out with the idea of capturing a reflection shot, I thought these big puddles and the nice light coming through were too much of a nice opportunity to pass up. So when approaching a scene like this, I think it can be quite fun to get down at quite a low angle and see the overall effect that has of just kind of mirroring the scene as a whole. Then again, I think it is also quite nice to have people running through or jumping over these puddles, people cycling through, just to add this extra dynamism or maybe a bit of humour as well, like with dogs playing in the puddle as well. We did also find a nice cafe window as well with some reflections going on. We had the sky reflected in it, we had some nice flowers in the window. So again, we tried a few different options with here, different focal lengths, different positions. Also, when taking a reflection shot in a cafe window, it can also be quite good to position yourself a bit closer to the window so you remove any kind of extra shadows that you're creating. You can see the impact of actually changing your focal point. So I tried a few options where I was focusing actually into the coffee shop itself and some was actually focusing on the window. You can tap on the phone screen to choose your focal point, and I quite like doing this. I also sometimes like to tap and hold, and that will lock the focal point so it doesn't kind of correct itself. This can be quite fun to just lock the focal point and just move around. Then you can also maybe lock the focal point on the window itself and see how that kind of changes the look, because it will dramatically change the way the photograph looks. You will also then include the texture of the window itself sometimes, or the texture of the clouds reflected on the windows. If I find a scene like this and there's no real urgency to move on, there's no people being like, what are you doing? I will maybe try as many different options as I can, just to give me lots of different options to choose from when I come to make my final selection. Always something to keep in mind, if you're not in a hurry, there's no real reason to move on. Just work the scene, I guess. Try different focal points, try different positions. Just enjoy it for what it is. And if you've got some lovely light coming through, particularly in London, the light can be quite scarce, and we had some lovely morning lights. So I really just wanted to capitalize on that and just try so many different options. So there's one particular shot I have of the light coming through the coffee shop window. There's some flowers on the table itself. And then we have the reflection of the kind of industrial building in the background. So we have all these layers in the scene itself. I love including layers in a photograph. Just adding all the extra depth, I think, draws in the viewer's eye and makes you want to look at the image for longer, just trying to figure out what's going on, where you are. With this series being in Hackney, I quite like the industrial element in the background as well. But then you also have the more modern element of the kind of trendy coffee shop. So it kind of creates this overall image of the area itself. So I think something to keep in mind when shooting reflections in windows like this is that they can easily get quite busy, just because there can be lots going on. You can maybe add too many elements in the foreground and the background, and it can become quite messy sometimes. This is something I always keep in mind. So, I guess it really comes down to personal preference and taste, but for me, I like to keep it on the edge of just being a bit too busy. And what I mean by too busy is just there are elements on top of each other. It can be quite hard to distinguish what is what. So we have the one picture I talked about earlier where we simply just have the light bulb in the sky itself. That's an example of a very simple photograph. We just literally have the light bulb in the sky and no other elements. I like to kind of maybe mix it up between the two and maybe try and build it up until I think it maybe has become a bit too busy. The more you practice, the more kinds of these shots you'll take. you'll see what I mean, and you'll see how they come together, and you'll see which kind of shots you prefer, I think. So when I shot the reflection of the puddle, I very often found myself leaning on the kind of continuous burst mode of my phone, just to kind of freeze any motion of people interacting with the puddle. When I was actually shooting the coffee shop window, that was much more of a very static scene. There was no people in the frame, so I found myself just generally slowing down and taking my time with it. So I've decided to include these two different examples of reflection shots in my final image. One more complex, where I've kind of built a few layers and elements into the frame, and one a bit more playful with this dog playing in the puddle. Simply because I think the puddle gives you this huge context of London Fields itself, and this is quite a kind of integral part of the area in which we were photographing. I also like that it includes this element of chance of this big puddle and the flooding the night before. And then the coffee shop window, again, I think this one gives you quite a lot of information about the area. And then the shot of the puddle in London Fields, I think, gives you even more information about the green spaces in the area, which are very important to London, of course. And there are also so many dogs around here, and I love photographing dogs, so it seemed like I might as well include a nice dog. So we have two examples there of how I've used reflections in different ways to build up this kind of portrait of the area in which I was photographing. So just a few thoughts as to how to use them, how you think you will use them, and how you will apply them to your own photography. Like I was saying, they can be quite a fun way to add contrast and kind of sense of mystery and add this whole other dimension to your photographs. So there are loads of different ways you can use them, and I encourage you to just experiment and enjoy it and just see what you can get. So just keep these kind of different techniques and ideas in mind when you are looking for your reflection photographs. In the next lesson, we'll look further into how to work with subframing and perspective.